in the United States, we have freedom of speech. Well, sort of. We obviously have some stipulations against direct threats of violence. And I think most people would agree with that. Most people would agree you can't say fire in a crowded building. That's dangerous for the people in that situation. You can't, say I'm going to punch you or let's go kill XYZ person. Most people agree that those things aren't really speech anymore and they're violence because some people would say, "Oh, well no, that's still speech because they haven't done anything yet." If somebody pulls a gun out, loads it, and points at your head, you would consider that a violent act, even though they haven't done anything yet, because now I have to defend myself against your violent act. So I do agree with that framework that you can be violent without actually doing anything. Just the threat of violence makes me have to react to it now. So we're on a violent encounter, even if you haven't done anything yet. So with that being said, how direct does the threat need to be? Because, we've got examples, and I hate to defend billionaires. I really do. I was considering this example. A lot of people talk about hate speech this, hate speech that. And I think most reasonable people will just brush that off and say those people are just complete nut jobs. We don't take them serious. But if we agree that direct threats of violence are bad because it can lead to violence, and it's not stable for the society, and we value a baseline of stability over freedom. I think most people agree with that. That's why we have speed limits. You can have your freedom, but you can only have so much freedom before it gets dangerous for everyone else around you. So we have to tame down the freedom to a little bit and kind of have an equilibrium where everybody's relatively happy. And I think that's fair. But when these people talk about, hate speech and speech leads to violence, I was thinking about the example of all the anti-billionaire rhetoric in terms of, eat the rich aren't people, et cetera, et cetera. All of that kind of dehumanizing language in regards to rich people. Now, do I think some of it is probably warranted? I would say so. And a lot of these people that are using that language would say that the rich are doing XYZ to them, they're underpaying them, which is leading to low quality of life for them, and the rich actually threw the first punch by underpaying them. And I do get what they're coming from. But regardless, we have had obviously some CEOs that have been shot. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that the general public sentiment and the hate speech against billionaires led to an environment where people thought it was acceptable to kill them or to hunt them or to intimidate them. And this is where we kind of get into this gray area. And, people say the same thing, gay people or LGBTQ people or black people or white people or Christians or literally every group. Because at this point, every group experiences a lot of hate. And every single group could make the claim that, one of our people was targeted by the overall sentiment and negative rhetoric in regards to my community. Literally every single group. You could have a Christian that says that all the anti-white male, straight Christian conservative led to one of ours being hunted down and killed. And a black man could say that all of the anti-black male rhetoric makes us seem like we're violent, and then somebody ended up, a cop, because he heard all this rhetoric, ended up killing me. So I can kind of see both arguments. People, I don't know if they would consider that a direct threat of violence. It's more of a direct societal upbringing to make it more dangerous for that group. But then we get into a different conversation of, well, if it's true, can we say it? Well, even if it is true, if it is going to lead to potential future violence, what do the percentages have to look like? What if I say something and there is a, 0.00001% increase in the likelihood that a billionaire dies because I said the billionaires are doing XYZ bad thing. People be like, well, that's not really direct enough. And, I think we should have the freedom to negatively speak about people who we think are doing bad things. But we kind of go back to the original example with you can't yell fire in a crowded building. It's like, most likely nobody's going to die from that. But what's the percentage? I did something direct. I agree with that. But is the comment, eat the rich, is that also not a direct comment? Now you might say, oh, well, that's different because, millions of people get together and say eat the rich. And then blame's not on me because I wasn't the only one that led to the environment to where people hated billionaires. And, I do still support free speech, obviously. I'm honestly probably a free speech absolutist. So I don't really like any hate speech regulations. And I really do think that when we see people getting arrested for direct threats of violence, a lot of times I agree with the person and not the people, arresting them. I'm like, I don't really know if that would rise to the level. But I do think it should be at least considered on where we draw the line, because it does seem kind of random we would say, I'm going to punch you. That's a direct threat of violence, probably. But what if we're talking to a group of people and like people that wear red shirts and black suits should be punched? It's like, okay, well, that's less direct, but if the guy across from me is in a red shirt and a black suit, I might feel targeted towards him. And then maybe I didn't punch him, but I told that guy, and then that guy said it to another person, and now we're like multiple layers deep, and then that guy punches him. It's like, can he go back to me and say, well, you kind of started this anti-black suit, red shirt rhetoric? So just something to think about. Where do you draw the line with free speech? Do you think hate speech exists? I'm leaning towards no, not because I don't think that speech could lead to violence, because I think obviously it does, even indirect speech, but I just think it's impossible to regulate. And I also would say that I would lean more towards freedom over safety, I think, in most instances. With the car example I gave earlier, we have speed limits because we need to tame down on freedom to keep everybody safe. And I do agree with that. But if we really wanted to keep people safe, we would reduce the speed limits in half everywhere. That would definitely reduce, deaths in cars. That would reduce car accidents if everybody's going slower. But I don't really want that. And that's the same thing we could say for gun control. If we completely eliminate guns, and there's some arguments that would actually make it more dangerous because we have less people capable of great force. We just have the elite fighters that would control society versus everybody, man, woman, kid could have a weapon and defend themselves. But regardless, I think most people generally agree that less guns means more safety. But I wouldn't really want to do that either, because I think we could maximize safety. But then what are you really doing? If you're completely maximized for safety, if everything is just how safe can we get, I don't really think that's living anymore. That would just be, you bunker yourself in a room, you kind of hide away. I would opt for freedom, even if that means that life expectancy goes down 1 year. And it wouldn't be direct like that because, some people would be dying at a very young age. Some people would die, if we had less safety regulations, maybe I would have died before. But that's kind of the risk you take, I would say.